Get ready, because in 2026, the European Union is kicking off a policy that could seriously change the game for global trade, and it's all being done in the name of climate change. Today, we're going to break down exactly what this new carbon border fee is and why it's a really big deal for businesses everywhere.
First, let me just ask you a question. Imagine you're running a company and you're facing some pretty strict and pretty expensive environmental laws at home. But what if you could just pack up, move your factory to a country with way looser rules, and basically keep polluting just as much, but without the cost? Now, is that fair to the other companies who stay behind and play by the rules? Well, that exact question is right at the heart of this whole new policy from the EU.
You see, this problem actually has a name. It's often called the carbon loophole. And it's a dilemma that has been a real headache for policymakers for years. It's also the exact reason why the European Union is now rolling out this massive new regulation, one that's designed to put a price on carbon right at its borders.
Now, the official, more technical term for this loophole is carbon leakage. And it's a simple but pretty powerful idea. If you make it expensive to pollute in one place, some companies might just move their polluting activities somewhere else, where it's cheaper. And what's the result? Well, you still got the same amount of carbon getting pumped into the atmosphere, it's just coming from a different zip code. This doesn't actually solve climate change, right? It just shuffles the problem around the globe.
So you can see how this creates a huge imbalance. Inside the EU, businesses have to deal with something called a carbon price, which is basically a tax on pollution. That means higher manufacturing costs. But outside the EU, in many places, that cost is super low or maybe even zero. It creates this totally uneven playing field that puts EU companies at a disadvantage and honestly makes it really tempting to just move production abroad. Okay, so that's the problem. How is the EU trying to fix it? Well, their solution has a name that's a bit of a mouthful: the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. We're just going to call it CBAM for short. Now, it sounds really complex, I know, but the idea behind it is actually pretty brilliant.
Probably the easiest way to get your head around it is to think of CBAM as a carbon equalizer. Its entire job is to make sure the carbon price baked into a product is the same, no matter if it was made inside the EU or imported from anywhere else in the world. It levels the playing field.
At its heart, when you strip it all down, CBAM is a tariff, but it's a very, very specific kind of tariff. When a company wants to import certain carbon-heavy goods into the EU, they'll have to pay a fee. And that fee is based on the carbon emissions that were created when that product was made. This is actually the world's first major attempt to do this, to put a price on the carbon that's embedded in globally traded goods.
All right, so we've covered the what and the why. But what about the how? Like, how is this actually going to work for businesses day to day? Let's break down the process.
It really boils down to three main steps. First, importers have to report all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the goods they're bringing in. Simple enough? Second, they have to buy these special CBAM certificates to cover those emissions. Now, here's the key part. The price of those certificates is designed to match what a European company would have paid for the same amount of pollution. And finally, everything gets checked and verified each year. So it's basically a whole new carbon accounting system right at the border.
Now, don't worry, this isn't all happening tomorrow. We're actually in a transitional phase right now. You can think of it like a practice run or a dress rehearsal, where companies just have to get used to reporting the emissions. But the big date, the one everyone has circled on their calendar, is 2026. That's when the system goes fully live and those financial payments really kick in. So you're probably wondering, does this apply to every single thing being imported into Europe? Not at first, no. The EU is being pretty strategic here. They're starting with a targeted approach, focusing on the industries where that risk of carbon leakage is the absolute highest. So who's on the front line? The initial list targets some of the biggest industrial emitters out there. We're talking iron and steel, cement, aluminum, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. Now, these weren't just picked out of a hat. These are basically the building blocks of our modern economy, and they are all incredibly energy-intensive to make. And the plan is to expand this list over time. But this is where it all starts. And this is a really strategic move. See, by targeting just these 6 sectors, the EU is hitting a huge slice of the global industrial emissions pie. It's a really focused approach that's designed to have the maximum possible impact, and it sends a very clear signal to producers all around the world. As you can imagine, a policy this ambitious and this disruptive isn't exactly getting a round of applause from everyone, not even close. In fact, opinions on this are sharply divided. Is this a brilliant new tool to fight for climate action? Or is it really just a protectionist weapon that could spark a global trade war? On one side, you have the supporters.
They see this as a vital climate tool. They say it'll encourage other countries to price their own carbon, and it finally levels the playing field for businesses inside the EU. But on the other side, you've got the critics, especially from major trading partners and developing nations. They're calling it a green protectionist tariff. They argue it unfairly punishes their industries, might even break world trade rules, and could set off a chain reaction of retaliatory tariffs against European goods.
Now, from the EU's perspective, the messaging is crystal clear. They don't frame CBAM as a trade weapon at all. They see it as a defensive measure, a shield. It's designed, they say, to protect the integrity of their own climate policies and to make sure all their hard work to decarbonize isn't just undermined by carbon leakage.
And so, that brings us to the final, critical question. When that switch finally gets flipped in 2026, what's the legacy of this policy going to be? Will it kickstart a new era of global carbon accountability, pushing industries everywhere to get greener? Or will it just be seen as an economic wall, sparking a whole new messy chapter of trade disputes? The next few years will decide, and you can bet the entire world will be watching.